Birkenhead near Liverpool, that they had to remove the video. Of course, on the day itself, despite 600 people being on the streets, about 40 police vehicles, I don't know how many hundred police with dog handlers and some riot police in the background, on the day there was not a single report in any of the British mainstream media. The BBC didn't cover it, none of the ITV, the independent channels covered it. There was simply one local radio station that published what had happened. Now, this was obviously a media clampdown, and why would you need a media clampdown? Because the government is terrified of the truth coming out about the corruption in British courts and the fact that ordinary people are now starting to move to sort the problem out themselves. So that's what it's about.
As he said, I mean, it just represents to me how much of a blind panic they're in, that they have to remove this video from the internet. And their excuse is, oh, you can't show footage of a court in session. I mean, the court wasn't even in session, and most of the video was of the protest outside. So again, that was just an excuse. And I mean, doesn't it show the fact that they're petrified of people understanding how, in this example, Roger Hayes, with the whole council tax issue, people can beat them at their own game. And I mean, that really goes to the heart of why they're so afraid, because if everyone else learns about how people are being successful in fighting it, then it's rapidly going to get out of control from their perspective.
Well, I think, Paul, that I know the Alex Jones show is pushing out a lot of good information for people about what is actually happening, and we are trying to do the same. But I think something very, very interesting has happened in the last 6 months. You can now feel, you can see, if you're looking in the right place, that we are starting, this is all the people, thousands, millions of people who are starting to wake up. We are now starting to drive our own governments because they also know people are waking up, and that is why we're suddenly seeing the rush through of all this very hard-hitting, draconian legislation to clamp down on American people and to clamp down on British people. They are now going flat out to introduce the dictatorships in Britain and America, and the reason they're having to rush is because of the rate we are now exposing what they're doing. And the beauty is, the more they do and the faster they do it, the more obvious it is to people that something is very wrong. So I think we, as well as getting out the message of all the terrible things that are happening at the moment, we've also very much got to focus on the positive things and where we're having successes. And one of the things that we know in Britain is we can't get justice, we can't bring treasonous politicians to justice because the courts are utterly corrupt. And one British MP called John Hemming, who came to an event we put on the weekend before last, was happy to stand on stage and be filmed saying that the British courts and judiciary are corrupt. So we've got to deal with these corrupt courts and these corrupt judges if we are going to get democracy and proper law and order restored in our country.
And that tipping point is going to be more likely the more the number of insiders, like the MP you just mentioned, come out and speak out against that. But I mean, readers of the UK column are well aware of, switching gears for the next topic, the fact that you've covered this serial state kidnapping of children for years now. And for our American audience, if you think the CPS is bad in the United States, then this certainly rivals it. We're talking about no court order, barely any legal process in many cases, police, from the stories I read, literally hunting down cars in the middle of the night to snatch babies from parents. I mean, Brian, we've read cases in the media about, you know, taking so-called obese children from parents, and the media will report on that at length. But what you've reported in the UK column is something that can only represent a deliberate assault on the family unit by the state with these kind of child kidnappings, child abduction, and eventually child abuse. I mean, tell us why this is happening in the UK and why it's so prevalent.
Well, you've made that very easy for me, because all we have to do is bring listeners back and get them focused on Saul Alinsky in particular, and also Gramsci, who was an Italian Marxist. You don't need to read huge books. You can go on the internet and just Google both of them. And what you will find these men talking about is getting in to destroy traditional democracies, to destroy traditional communities by getting in and destroying families, and particularly Christian families. And their tactics are, instead of guns and bombs and bullets, you actually infiltrate into the establishment, the system itself, and then you do the damage from the inside. But the family unit, the heterosexual family unit, was always their primary target, because if you can break up mothers and fathers, mums and dads, and you can take the children, then those children can be groomed straight into the new political ideology. And what we've got to do is put the scale of this. Remember that Britain is a much smaller country than America, but we're dealing with, at the moment, with over 60,000 children who are actually have been taken away from their parents. The children are being taken inside courts where there are no juries, where the press is not allowed to be. So these are secret courts. Their star chamber is the correct word in Britain for them. They are secret courts. The evidence brought in is falsified. Psychiatrist reports, psychologist reports contain lies, false information. They are factually incorrect. And it doesn't matter what the parents do inside the court, their children are taken from them. And again, we know that the government in UK is beginning to get very fearful of the speed at which the information is coming out, because in the last 2 days, a gentleman called David Norgrove has published his report on family justice, and he's actually saying that the whole process should be speeded up. In particular, he's saying that if a couple breaks up, the father should not have automatic access to his own children. And he's also saying, this man, that grandparents who actually get involved when couples break up and say, we can look after the children, that those grandparents are actually doing damage to the children, and they should be cut out. Now, David Cameron, let's stay focused on David Cameron, because this man is so dangerous. David Cameron, the Prime Minister of Britain, is backing a report which says that fathers should be denied access to their children. This is the work of Gramsci, and of course David Cameron is not a conservative in any shape or form. He is a subversive. I personally regard him as a domestic extremist, and what he is doing is implanting Gramscian ideology. So this is why we're having such an amazing attack on families, and thousands of children are being taken away, because if we can break down the family, then the state can claim the children. It's as simple as that.
And I mean, this goes to the very heart of broken Britain, which is this phrase we hear constantly. Most people don't realise that it's been deliberately broken. If it's broken, then somebody's going to put it back together again, and you can bet that that's going to be the state. And a shining example of what it leads to is what we witnessed in the UK back in August, which was the riots. Now, I'm guessing, Brian, that came as a completely expected to you. I mean, your newspaper's been predicting widespread social unrest. I predicted it in articles I wrote 2 years ago. So I'm guessing that the riots, which started in London and spread across major cities back in August, didn't come as a surprise to you.
Oh, well, absolutely not. And it was very easy to see within a few hours, but certainly within 24 hours, that these were not spontaneous riots from people who'd had enough. It just didn't stack up. We know how difficult it is to organise people across the country, and here we had the British government saying that riots were being organised in not only London but other cities across the UK, that these riots were being organised by young black teenagers using BlackBerry phones. This is absolute nonsense. What was actually happening was the violence was being created by government agitators, and we also know from residents in some of the areas where the riots took place that they watched police deliberately held back so that they didn't intervene, and the thing then grew. The trouble on the streets grew. So somebody was ordering the police, let's stand back, let's allow this thing to grow, let's kick it off. And we've got better information than that, because some British policemen, and these are brilliant people because they're so brave, they have actually been leaking information that when they were taken into an area where the rioting had started, they saw other so-called police units who they didn't recognise. They had no idea what units these really were. They had no idea where the people had come from. And in many cases, they were talking about so-called policemen who didn't have any formal number or name identity on them. So we have British policemen who are themselves now starting to blow the whistle on the fact that when there is trouble on the streets, there are agitators who are being moved into position, via our own policing system. So this is very, very dangerous, because we have now got government-backed agitation. And if listeners are thinking, where do they want to take this, I'll give my opinion. So this is just Brian Gerrish's opinion on this one. They want absolute major violence on the streets of Britain, because if they can create that major violence, they will bring in the Civil Contingencies Act, which is roughly equivalent to the American Patriot Act. The moment the Civil Contingencies Act is in place, we are living in a dictatorship. So whenever we're giving talks as the UK column or the British Constitution Group, we're constantly warning that we need people to be peaceful. We don't need fights between blacks and whites or Muslims or Christians, whatever the groups are. If we fight amongst ourselves, the criminals who are in power in the Senate in America and Congress and in Westminster in Britain, those criminals win. We've got to be smarter than violence at the moment. We've got to keep it calm and peaceful, and we've got to get the truth out about how our countries are being destroyed from the inside.
And I mean, just to back you up, we actually did a story in regard to the riots where Twitter users were reporting that men claiming to represent the media were actually driving around the streets and paying them to riot, paying them to break shop windows, as he said, paying them to become agitators. So, I mean, those riots, obviously, after it went on the social meme and it was on the news every night. You had copycats going out and doing the same thing. But the genesis of those riots, as you said, was definitely provocateur in many ways. Extrapolating this out, just about the general state of Britain, Brian, perhaps the best way to frame that is to ask, what do groups like Common Purpose want to turn Britain into, and how far have they got down that path?